Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's live chat. I'm Pierre Ferrari, President and CEO of Heifer International, and I'm very excited to have with me today renowned chef and owner of Crafted Hospitality, Tom Colicchio. And Tom, as you know, is a dedicated advocate for food security, nutrition, sustainable food system. Tom, thank you very much for joining me today.
Great seeing you again, Pierre. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think we saw each other back in 2014, I think, in LA.
It's been a while. Yeah, we were in LA together. My wife and I got a nice award from Heifer. So that was
that was fun and well done. So, in this time of COVID and all of the other and continuing poverty and hunger, your work on poverty alleviation in the United States particularly is really admirable. So perhaps you want to tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing. And I heard a little earlier today the incredible advocacy work, lobbying work that you're actually doing to get the right kind of things passed. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess just briefly, about 7 or 8 years ago, I've always been active as a chef, especially around food insecurity, working with a lot of anti-hunger organizations in and around New York City for the last, 30, 40 years that I've been a chef in New York. And around 7 or 8 years ago, my wife was mentoring a young girl who was living in her family was living in a shelter in Brooklyn, and it was clear that she was hungry whenever we'd see her, and we would send food home with her and to her family and help her out. And my wife's a filmmaker, and so she decided to explore the issue with hunger in America. Of course, I think worldwide hunger is very clearly something that we accept and know, and we all grew up with the Sally Struthers commercials with the flies buzzing around, kids in sub-Saharan Africa. But we have a major problem with hunger and malnutrition right here in the United States. And so she wanted to explore that deeper. And she made a film called A Place at the Table, and it did quite well. And, because of my recognition and, from TV and being a chef, it gave me a real soapbox I had the soapbox. It just gave me an opportunity to really sort of bring these issues of hunger into the forelight. So we took the film all around the country and to the college campuses and community centers and to Congress as well. And that led to me co-founding an organization called Food Policy Action, where we published a scorecard at FPA, and we graded Congress on how they voted around food issues, especially issues of hunger and farming and transparency in the food system. And so that made me an unpaid, unregistered lobbyist, lobbying on behalf of people who can't feed themselves. I left the organization. It looks like I'm going to get back involved with them. But we can end hunger in America, and that was the real, what we learned from the film and from work that my wife did. We learned that we can end hunger in America. We just don't have the political will to end hunger in America, and so it's something that I decided that, we're going to make this my life's work. But, I work really just to get the message out there, to make it political, make feeding people political. I do work with various organizations, but I'm not someone who's on the ground feeding people. There's organizations doing that. For me, it was about really using our voice, reframing the conversation. And then we did a lot of work with Frameworks as a think tank in DC that really helped sort of look at the way that anti-hunger organizations were putting the message out there. And often it was working against us. When you have an anti-hunger organization saying that, oh, we feed 1 million people a year, well, government says, well, they got it, we're good, and you offload that to charities, which was what the Republican Party, really did really well starting back in the 80s with Reagan. It was 1,000 points a light. Let churches deal with that. And the problem's too big. And so COVID really exposed the size of the problem.
Yeah. So, you're doing actual advocacy or lobbying work, as you said, unpaid or unregistered. But, we work with smallholder farmers in Arkansas. We, as you probably know, we have a ranch out there, and we're working with primarily livestock farmers. We've got a whole processing system and everything else. And a lot of farmers have been coming to us to participate in our e-commerce activity because they have lost their market, which is restaurants, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it's gotten to the point where they're beginning to face hunger, some of the farmers, because they don't have a market for their goods.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, because you got a whole system, right? It's a whole.
Well, my podcast, I actually, we discussed this in two different episodes. So just on a smaller scale, when I close the restaurants, I operate 4 restaurants in the New York area, 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in Los Angeles and 2 in Las Vegas. Let's take Vegas out of the equation for a second. I laid off around 470 people. But I also, we spend millions of dollars a year in food that we purchase.
Yeah.
And we are obviously very active in the farm to table movement. And so when those restaurants closed, farmers didn't have a market anymore. There's a 2-tiered distribution system in this country. One is geared towards supermarkets and the other one is geared towards restaurants. And then factor in institutions like college campuses and universities and things like that, other cafeterias, sporting arenas and things like that. Tremendous amount of food goes through there. Certainly not farm to table. But farmers had to pivot and try to do something, and get that food directly to the consumer. And some did a really good job of it and some struggled with it. But, so when we saw all those stories about milk being thrown out and pigs not being slaughtered and euthanized, it was because there was an overproduction because, if you were selling to a distributor that packaged your milk into 5-gallon containers for institutional feeding, they weren't packaging quarts and pints and things like that. They had nowhere to sell it. So farmers, if they were selling it to that system, they had nowhere to go. We saw, COVID shut down so many meat plants. Well, these farmers, that pig doesn't know about COVID. That pig, when it hits 200 pounds, it needs to get slaughtered. It needs to get processed. And those processing plants closed down. So the farmer had a choice: figure a way to get that pig to market somewhere, or euthanize the pig. Because even if they let the pig start to, continue to feed the pig, it costs money to feed those pigs. Now, we're not talking about 2 pigs sitting in an acre, yard somewhere. We're talking about massive amounts of animals. Problem is, if you let it continue to eat, you've got to feed the pig. And now all of a sudden the processor can't take it. That processor is not set up to take pigs over 200 pounds. I mean, maybe there's a 5-pound, 10-pound fluctuation that they can put through the processing plant, but anything over that, it doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't work. And so, that's a process set up for efficiency. And so what it really showed you is that we need to decentralize our food system. Tom Philpott, who's a great ag writer, wrote a book and really talked about with California, and the effects of the climate that's changing. We're going to have to move our food production out of California as well, decentralize that, because my concern, as soon as COVID hit, I had 2 thoughts. One, my restaurants, closing, and I know it was laying off a bunch of people. I thought there was going to be major disruptions in the food system, and there were some. I have a little garden out where I am right now. I have about 20, raised beds. And my wife and I were talking about, like, all right, what's essential right now? Like, we got to ship things here. And I said, well, I got to get, we live in Brooklyn, but we have a little farmhouse out in Long Island, and that's where I have a garden. I was like, I got to get out. This is like April. So I got to get out and get the garden going. And she's like, what for? I'm like, that's how we're going to feed ourselves.
Yeah, right.
so the system really, and again, this is what COVID has done. And so I think on 2 sides of this, it's really forcing us to take a deep look at how food is grown, how it's processed, and the systems by which the food flows through, and how they have to be more resilient. Number one. On the hunger side of it, I think what could come out of this, there are, we're hearing stories and we're seeing on the news, when it's not 24/7 political news, we're seeing the lines of cars 3 hours long, people lining up food banks, looking to feed their families. These are people who were thoughtfully middle class, maybe even upper middle class, on January and February, and all of a sudden found themselves out of work. A lot of families, they even if they're upper middle class, they're not socking a ton of money away. They're kind of, your life expands as you start to make more money, and all of a sudden they're in 3-hour lines waiting to get food. So what I'm hoping that comes out of this is that there's a greater empathy, and we could start moving away from the straw man that's set up as the person that's just working the welfare system, or someone that's lazy. No one wants to be born into poverty, and it's hard to get out. So I'm hoping now that someone who was solid middle class, who never thought they would have to line up to get food, may have a greater empathy for someone who's struggling, and at least understand that. And so when we go to Congress and say $40 billion a year could end hunger in this country, someone's not going to say, well, you know, I don't want to pay for those people. And so that's why I hope that people can see that you know, something like a pandemic or localized weather patterns can put people out of work. When you saw Hurricane, you know, Sandy, people were out of work for 8 months in some places in New York. And so I'm hoping that maybe there's a deeper sense of empathy for people who are struggling.
You know, it's interesting you talk about this potential shift in empathy. You know, we have noticed, and we're not the only nonprofit or charity that's actually experiencing this right now, which is a very substantial increase in donations.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not talking about 1 or 2%. I'm talking about 30, 40% increases.
Right.
And we, you know, we're delighted, of course. I mean, why wouldn't we be? But we're asking ourselves, why is this happening right now? And, you know, with all the turmoil going on, including the unemployment, we were worried that actually we would actually be behind last year, but we're ahead. We're ahead.
Yeah. I suspect that you know, when COVID hit, it hit right in the season where most C3s do their fundraising. They do events.
Yeah.
And so those events we couldn't do those events. We couldn't hold those events. And so I think a lot of people who normally support the organization stepped up. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many new donors you have versus old donors that are actually just re-upping.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
But people are generous, and
yes.
You know, I know there's a lot of people who have reached out to me. I mean, I had an individual reach out to me and said, she's, you know, fairly well off, and said, I want to directly help people. And I've got a pile of money before I have to go to, you know, move stuff around, and I want to give it directly to families. Do you have families that you know that you've, and we did, and so she actually wrote checks directly to families.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, there's America's generous. We've always been generous, and people around the world. I think people step up. I think people step up in times of need. You see the need, you understand the need, and people step up. Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So in terms of the system, you know, I mean, we've talked a lot about the food system and restaurants, everything else. You know, as I said, we're operating a local livestock operation. We're probably going to be selling something like $13 or $14 million of livestock, which isn't bad at retail. And we're growing it with, you know, we've got several farmers involved, lots of farmers involved. And we are growing vegetables and fruits, and we're actually distributing a fairly large proportion of it to food banks locally. You know, what more could we do? Should we plant more land? What do we do?
No. So I think we can be done. So right now, the big meat processors, and you probably run into this, the big meat processors, there's 25 different licenses, I think 20 different licenses I think 25 that the USDA gives out for meat production. The big companies make sure that you cannot get a license. It makes it very difficult. So here I'm out in the North Long Island, on the North Fork of Long Island, and I have a couple friends that raise chickens, and they're a commercial operation. Another guy does chicken pigs, and another operation does cows. There's no slaughterhouses here. So
Really?
the woman who's raising chickens, she has a license where she can slaughter her chickens. She can only sell them whole at her farm or at New York farmers markets.
That's it.
She can't cut them and package them up for the supermarket. She doesn't have that license. She doesn't have that USDA inspector sitting in her facility. And so I think that the USDA needs to look at how they give. So right now there are, I think, 500 slaughterhouses are meat processing plants in the country. I think like 50 of them, I may have the numbers wrong right now. I used to have them committed to memory. I think like maybe 40 of them actually produce 90% of the meat that we eat.
All right, the big ones.
And so we can decentralize this. We can issue more licenses. We can spend more money in the USDA so they can get more inspectors out there, and we can again spread out the production. But the big companies will make sure that that's impossible, and they'll spend a ton of lobbying dollars to make sure you cannot do that. Shelley Pingree, a congresswoman from Maine, has a bill out right now where she's trying to change some of these laws and loosen these
Yeah.
restrictions.
Just so you know, we actually have Heifer actually owns a series of slaughtering houses for that very reason in Arkansas. And we've just gotten a $1 million grant from USDA / local state departments. And we also have a $5 million facility. So we kind of have been lobbying for support for exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a small operation relative to what, JBC and Cargill and all the others do.
Right. But you're that's how you support family farms. I mean, this is how that works. And a lot of people are always like, well, how? And I hear it all the time. Well, how can I support family farms? And where do I buy that meat? I think understanding the systems in the first place is important. But then trying to especially now, everything's being shipped, everything's in boxes, and so there are places you can go.
Grassroots co-ops, just
for
the whole. That's the name of our operation, Grassroots Co-op.
There you go. Yeah, I think again, this is on the other side of COVID, and this is one thing I think that COVID's done. I mean, again, you saw the news stories of what's happening in these plants, and people, people are ready. They're ready for a different way to feed their families, and this is the struggle right now, because nutrition in this country, calories are cheap, but nutrition is expensive.
Yeah. And
so it's becoming really, really difficult to feed your family nutritious food.
So therein
lies the problem when you are low income and maybe you're using SNAP and you're trying to feed your family. That's the other problem right now. In the HEROES Act, there's also a bill that will increase SNAP benefits by 15%. So that's the other thing right now. Food prices are going up, but SNAP benefits haven't increased. And so that nutrition piece is so key. And yet it's expensive to feed your family, nutritious food.
So you obviously, by running restaurants, you're very close to consumer behavior and everything else, right? We have made the point with our meat processing plants and the local farmers and everything else that they need to pay the full cost of raising pasture-raised animals in an ecological manner, et cetera, et cetera. But it is more expensive. There's no doubt that it's more expensive. And you think, is there in your mind, is there a growing consumer base that's prepared to pay the premium that's necessary?
Well, you're bringing up a really interesting topic right now, because not only do we have to start realizing the real cost of growing that type of food, but in restaurants, we're going to have to start realizing the price. Is restaurants in this country, even high-end restaurants, expensive restaurants, are still, relative to European restaurants on the same level, are it's a bargain eating in America.
Yeah.
Because labor is so cheap. And that has to change as well. I mean, I'm part of the group fighting for what we call one fair wage in New York, where servers will no longer have a tip minimum wage. Now, tip minimum wage in New York is a little higher than most of the country. It's at $10.35. But in a lot of places in the country, I think in Arkansas, I guarantee minimum wage for tipped employees is still $2.01.
Yes, $2 or $3. Yeah.
And so again, I would love to pay my people I'd rather pay all my servers a salary and forget about tips completely. I'd love to see the tip system abolished, but then I'd have to raise prices by 25%. So two things are happening at the same time. Yes, the better restaurants that are using pasture-raised animals, they have to charge more for food because it costs more. And you can't continually put the pressure on the farmers to take the hit. It's not fair. And on the labor side of things, in restaurants and in food processing plants, I mean, think about this. I mean, food processing, someone working in a food processing plant at Cargill in somewhere down south, they're not making. What are they making? $10 an hour?
If that,
yeah. And so $3.75. Yeah, and so that's why that chicken that's going through there is so cheap. Farmer's not making money. The processor's not making money. Company's making a lot of money. And so
maybe the retailer, Kroger and company. Yeah.
Right. The retailer probably isn't making the ton. They're banking on the fact that that's a low margin item in the supermarket. That's bringing people into the supermarket where they're going to get their better margins on some of the other stuff.
Yeah. Like a like a deal. I mean, yeah, losing money on a particular piece to attract people, and then selling them mustard or something.
No,
Yeah,
soda,
at
things
high
like
margin.
that, high margin.
Soda, yeah. Interesting. It's just that. So let me switch from very serious subject here to something perhaps a little lighter. What do you cook at home? What's your favorite food at home?
I tell you, I've been cooking pretty much breakfast, lunch, and dinner since the
I
pandemic.
know.
And I'm getting tired of my own food.
Ah,
No, when I cook at home, it's homey stuff. I cleared out my garden the other day, and I had a bunch of. I was gone for 2 months. I was shooting Top Chef, so I was in Portland, Oregon for about 2 months, and I came home and my garden was really overgrown, and I had a whole bunch of poblano peppers, and so I just roast them all whole with a bunch of onions, and then mixed a bunch of cannellini beans in with them, and that was great. So for me, it's all homey stuff. I'll roast a chicken, piece of fish on a grill, vegetables. It's never a composed plate. I'm never plating food, meaning, there's never a pretty plate of food. It's all family style. And I have two young children at home, 9 and 11, my wife, and I have an older son. He was with me for a couple weeks in the summer. But I have my 9-year-old's really picky and essentially will eat white food. I did go down the rabbit hole of baking sourdough bread pre-COVID, right before. Every year I promise myself, I have a lot of hobbies, and a lot of them are more summertime hobbies. I fish and garden. I play guitar. That's an all year hobby. But I always, every winter roll around, like I want to teach myself. I'm not a baker. Not all chefs can bake. When I was a 17-year-old, starting out in a restaurant, I was working. They stuck me in the bake shop, and I hated it. But I had an interest in making bread, and so this is the summer I did it, and the winter. I'm sorry, the winter. So this fall, I got my starter going, started baking, and I was baking every other day. And then during the pandemic, it was just like,
what else are you gonna do, right?
What else exactly? For the 2 months I was away, I put my starter to sleep, and then just 2 days ago, I baked my first loaf again. And so I've been doing a lot of that. But home, it's pretty simple meals. I would do a dinner party, every now and then, and go a little more overboard, but we're not doing that these days either. So
either, right? Yeah, right.
It's real homey stuff. Like tonight, in fact, right before I got on the call, my wife was out, for a walk with a friend and the dogs, and she said, "We got to get some vegetables in this house. There's nothing here."
Right.
So I'll go to my garden's done, so I'll go to the farm stand here and pick up some stuff. But it's basic stuff. I don't.
So without getting too personal, the relationship with your wife, you do all the cooking.
Yes.
Okay, that's very clear.
I do the cleaning too. I don't know how I got that under the.
Oh, you got both. Wow.
No, she helps
I do
out.
the cleaning. My wife does.
No, she listen. If I wasn't here for 2 months, so she helped.
Yeah, right.
And my kids, I get on a Zoom call with me, like, "Mom's doing okay. She's doing all right."
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah.
I listen. It's when we're busy, and the kids my kids are actually in school, which is great.
Okay.
But when we get home, it's like homework and music lessons and stuff like that, and it's like you got to get food on the table quickly. So I can do that a lot faster.
Quicker and faster, yeah. And you enjoy it?
Yeah. No, I started cooking because I love to cook. In fact, I mean, truth be told, chefs don't cook in restaurants. Cooks cook in restaurants.
Right.
Sous chefs cook in restaurants. So this is how I explain it to people when they ask me, "Are you in there cooking?" It's like, well, if you go to see, an orchestra play, right? Who gets top billing? I mean, maybe someone who wrote the piece and is dead for 200 years, but the conductor does, right? The conductor. You don't expect that conductor to jump in the pit and pick up a cello and start playing, and they probably can, but if they did that, there'd be pure pandemonium. So in a kitchen, the chef is orchestrating. They set up the system by which you produce food. They do all the recipes and menu planning and stuff like that. And maybe there's some input from some of the people that are there. But when service starts, you're calling out the tickets, you're coordinating the hot food and the cold food. I set my kitchen's set up where there's a fish side and a meat side, so I'm coordinating that. That's what a chef does. So it's really about the systems by which the chefs set it up. And a lot of the chefs that set up better systems are usually the better chefs.
Yeah.
But I didn't get into this industry because that's what I like to do. In fact, I really don't like to do that piece of it. I love to cook, so I still enjoy it. It's like my first love. It's something I always want to do.
Yeah. That's it. I come from a line of chefs actually as well, and unfortunately the talent has been declining over time.
No. See, here's the thing. People ask me all the time, how do you be how can I be a better cook?
Right.
So I tell them this. It just happens to be next to me, so I'll grab it. And so I say, well, I play this every day, and that's the only way I'm going to get better at it, right? I'm not going to get better if it just sits in the corner and looks pretty, and I don't play it. So if you want to be a better cook, you got to cook every day. You got to cook. You actually have to cook and get get out of the cookbooks and learn technique and learn basics. Because again, I can learn 5 chords and play a lot of songs.
Yeah,
it doesn't make me a musician. Right? So if you have to do a cookbook that you like to go to and follow that recipe,
right,
it's a limit to what you can do. You're learning that recipe. Learn how to braise, learn how to roast, learn how to saute, learn a very easy thing. What grows together goes together. And then you can kind of do whatever.
The chords. Those are the chords.
Right. And then once you learn all that stuff, then theory. Then you can go and riff and you can play with other people and you can do whatever you like. And then do
you think this whole thing about cooking, and when we cook here at home, we clearly pay attention to the nutrition, to the content of the food, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that's something that could help America? That people, that something has happened, that everybody's cooking and is paying attention to because it's hard to do junk food by yourself.
Yeah, but again, I think people have to afford it. People have to, The problem was going back to like the 50s. It was all about convenience. Everything was about convenience.
Yeah.
Right. All the marketing. You look at all those Mad Men ads back in the 50s and 60s. It was all about convenience. How to free that housewife up from the chores of. They actually basically said cooking is a chore.
Right.
It's a horrible thing to do. So we're going to free you up by do all these things that make it easy. And then fast food comes along because, hey, you can run out and get a burger in no time at all.
Even more convenient. Yeah.
Right. More convenient. And they kind of build it as being nutritious. And now we know it's not at all. But so you kind of have to, we need to slow down a little bit and find the time to do that.
Yeah.
It costs more money. I'm sorry, not more money. It takes more time to go to farm.
It takes more time. Yeah.
And to cook. But I think that at some point we're going to have to come to terms with our healthcare costs.
Yes.
We're currently spending $200 billion a year in healthcare costs that are associated with poor diets. Let that sink in. And so if we want to actually have a real discussion in this country about lowering healthcare costs, let's have a discussion about keeping people healthy. And that starts with food.
Yeah. Right? Do you think Europeans eat better than we do?
Probably on the margins, yeah.
The margins, yeah.
Probably. I think more people cook at home. There's plenty of fast food. I was in Italy.
Yeah, we've conquered the world. Yeah.
Yeah. But there seems to be less of it. And then in Europe, especially now, you have a lot of young men who are still living home, so they're still getting mama's cooking. That's still happening. They're not in the house; they're staying home, and that happens more in Europe, especially in Italy. Which is why COVID ravaged Italy so quickly, because you had, young people in their 20s going out and bringing it home, because you have multiple generations living under one. More of that in Europe than there is in America.
Interesting, yeah. Wow. So I was hopeful that with all the people, our e-commerce sales went through the roof during COVID. Absolutely through the roof. 4 or 5 times what we were selling before COVID, which was a boon from a financial point of view, obviously. We actually were able to keep supply, most of it. And I was hoping that that people have rediscovered cooking, and the pleasures of that.
I think they have. But then, see, I think they have, and the question is, will they stick with it? There's a commercial.
Yeah, right.
There's a commercial out there right now for a meal kit company that delivers to your house. And what is the commercial? The woman's sitting there and she goes, "Oh, this was delivered to me." And she takes one bite and she looks at her partner and says, "We don't have to cook anymore." This is what they're selling now. You don't have to cook now. Now there's well, you're not going to go out to a restaurant, but we're going to send you these meals home. I think what I'd love to see. Let's put home ec back into schools.
Yes, I agree with that.
Let's teach kids about nutrition and about cooking at home. Um, it's a life skill. This is the thing. It's like, and I'm starting to say younger people are more interested, and maybe, yeah, listen, I do a reality TV show, which clearly these days, having a reality TV show is, it's kind of, you get a bum rap, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
And, but one thing I do see is kids watch the show and they're getting more interested in cooking.
Yeah.
And I had a, there's every day on social media, I have some parent who says, send me a picture of their kid, in a Top Chef get up or something. So I think, listen, clearly people are cooking at home now. I hope, and again, for me, growing up and loving food, and probably the reason I became a chef was because of love of food. But if I had, when I started thinking about my childhood, I was required to be at the dinner table every night. And I didn't live in a strict household, but it was just something we did.
Yeah.
But I think back on, I grew up fishing with my grandfather, and we would go crabbing and clamming and, catch 2 bushels of crabs. And, then we would cook them in marinara sauce and do this whole pasta. We called it macaroni back then, macaroni and crab gravy, we called it. And then we pick crabs all night. But it wasn't just the immediate family. This was 20 people. It was friends. And, the conversation would be, sports and then maybe family gossip and then politics or whatever. But what that did, the food, it's not the food, it brought us around the table. And so what I'm hoping now is as families are spending more time at home and cooking, what they're really getting is the benefit of sitting around the table and having dinner with each other.
Having conversations.
Maybe that's what's going to start.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. I think, I was just thinking about my younger son who loves to cook. And that's exactly what he says. He says, let's get together and cook. I mean, maybe it's, let's get some shrimp and some crab and put it all together, newspaper on the table, and pour it all out with the corn and everything else. Yeah, that's wonderful.
And so, that's, during the summer, we do have some friends out here that we become really, close. Yeah. We did a lot of outdoor sort of dinner parties, outside. Yeah. And so, and that's what I really miss the most, especially now it's getting colder. It's just being with people, having a good time, and that's when you sit back, the phones go down, and you kind of enjoy people, and it's slowing us down a little bit. And,
take it slow, food.
Slow life, and even just slow life,
Slow life.
It's not about realizing that every time someone that buzzer goes off on your phone, that you have to respond to.
Oh my God!
It's Pavlovian, to that phone. Yeah. It's like and we got to get away from that. We got to, and I think on the other side, the person who is buzzing you needs to understand that response is not going to come immediately. It's just not going to happen. And,
I know the younger generation. I mean, my younger daughters, if we don't answer the phone within 5 minutes, they get upset with us. We're trying to train them that, well, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll get back to you.
I'll get back to you. I mean, Tom, it's been sorry.
Yeah, I like the button that says "Can't talk right now."
Can't talk right now. That's right. Yeah. We do that. Okay, Tom, it's been a wonderful time talking to you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Great seeing you again. And I love your organization. Love what you're doing. And
well, we love what you're doing too.
If I'm ever down in Arkansas, I'll come and check out.
Come to the ranch. You'll be blown away by what we do, and if you're interested in seeing a processing plant, we can show you that.
Yeah, I'd love to. In fact, we're going to push hard to try to sort of change production, and maybe that's a place that we can gather some politicos around to show them how run.
It's really quite a thing that we've. I mean, it's more serendipitous than anything else, but we've built quite a thing.
Great.
All right. Be good. Take care, Tom. Ciao. Bye bye.